Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today I want to show you my favorite feature of the Gateway API, and that's ListenerSet. The plan for today is I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Gateway API, so even if you're new, you kind of understand what it's all about. Then I will tell about ListenerSet, which is a new feature in Gateway 1.5, and then we spend most of the time with the demo. If you're interested in the slides or the code I'm showing you today, you can scan the QR code or you'll find the link in the description down below. For the Gateway API, this is the one entry point into our cluster. This means we have one public IP address or CNAME record, and we point our DNS entries there. Then with the gateway, we have to control where our traffic is going. For example, we send it to the backend, API, to the frontend, wherever it needs to go. And to do this, we have a resource called Gateway, and this gateway contains all the listeners. So if you take a look at one of the example gateways, then we can see we have here 3 listeners. So the first one is on port 80 and listens to everything. The second one is port 443 for HTTPS. It has a specific URL configured, and it also has down here a reference to a secret configured. And in this secret, the cert manager is going to write the TLS certificate, and this enables us to have HTTPS automatically. Then we have a third listener, again, port 443, with a different URL and a different secret. And you can already see that if you have more URLs you're listening to or more domains, it gets quite a long list. And currently I'm working a lot with platform engineering, multi-tenancy clusters. And if you have like 10 or 20 teams that use your cluster, this is becoming a massive gateway or like set of configurations. And it's also very hard to manage. For example, you don't want the teams to manage the gateway because they could break it for everyone. So they have to create a pull request, but then the platform engineering team becomes the bottleneck and they have to review all these changes. This is also the reason why I said ListenerSet is my favorite feature, because with the current gateway, it's just a massive hassle for multi-tenancy. But with the ListenerSet, we can have a kind of gateway where it's managed by the teams. This means the teams create this ListenerSet. They can configure on what port they're listening to, what URL they're listening, and also the reference to the TLS secret. And it's basically like the gateway, but it's in the namespace of the teams, and they have full control over it. And if they break or mess up their ListenerSet, they don't affect the other teams. This also means that the gateway doesn't need to be changed. So I configure one default gateway with port 80 because that's what the gateway needs, even though it's never used. And then the teams just create the ListenerSet they need for the applications. Here we can see an example ListenerSet. As you can see here, it's of type ListenerSet. Then we have a reference to the gateway. And down here, we have again the listeners. So we can see we have HTTPS on port 443 with our URL. And down there, we can see the reference to our secret. So it's basically the same as the gateway. It's just for the team. We can also see here that we have an annotation to the cluster issuer. And this will allow us to configure automatically created TLS certificates with the cert manager. This is what I'm going to show you in another video. Today, we're just going to set up the ListenerSet. What's important is that it was introduced in the Gateway API version 1.5. This means if you have an older version, or for example, the Azure Application Gateway for Containers, which is also on an older version, you don't have this feature yet. I think most of the common gateway APIs have this already implemented. Today, I'm going to show you how to do it in Envoy, but I think, or I'm pretty sure, you can also use Nginx or Traffic. Now, with this theory out of the way, let's switch over to terminal and let's create a new cluster and then configure the ListenerSet. All right, here in the terminal, let's define a couple of variables first. So these are the variables for my AKS cluster. You don't have to use AKS, and if you already have a Kubernetes cluster running, you can just skip ahead with the chapters down below. Then we have a couple of variables for our gateway and Envoy. And lastly, we have the variables for our demo app. I'm just going to use traffic who am I today. Therefore, I call it traffic namespace and app name. But if you want to test it yourself, you have to change the URL and everything else can stay the same as it is. With the variables defined, we now create a new resource group, and then we're going to deploy everything inside this resource group. I'm going to create an AKS cluster with OIDC issuer enabled and workload identity enabled. Both are necessary for the enter workload ID feature, and this will allow us to map a managed identity with a service account inside the cluster. This is going to be necessary for the second video, where I'll show you how to set up the cert manager with the listener set. And there we are going to use the DNS Zone challenge. And therefore, we need access to the DNS Zone. If you just want to follow the demo for today, you can skip this last 2 parameters. So you can skip that and just set up the most simple AKS cluster. This is going to take around 5 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to stop the video. And once it's finished, we will continue. The cluster is created. Now download the credentials so I can access it. And now I can get started setting up the Gateway API. I'm using Helm to install Envoy as my Gateway API. I'm using the version 1.8.2. It's the newest version of recording. And as you can see, I keep it as simple as possible. I just provide the namespace and I also create the namespace at the same time. I have a couple videos where I go more into the detail about the Gateway API, Envoy, the whole setup. So I'm going over it a bit quickly today. I'll have the link down in the description. And if I forget, you'll just find it on my YouTube channel. Now that we have Envoy running, we can check our gateway. And there you see we don't have any gateways. And the same for the gateway class. This means we have to create them now ourselves. First, I'm going to create the gateway class. That's the same as always. Just of type gateway class. And here with the controller name, I reference Envoy. If you're using Nginx or Traffic, the gateway class might be already created when you deploy the gateway, or you have to create it yourself. Then you'll find in the documentation what controller name you have to provide here. Let's apply this. And then we're going to create our gateway. And as I said, with the listener set, the gateway is as simple as it can be. So we just provide a name and the namespace, the gateway class we've just created, and one listener with port 80. This is necessary because by definition, the gateway has to have at least one listener, even though it's not going to be used. So we apply this, and then we can check our gateway with kubectl get gateway. And there you can see it's not programmed yet, or it's false, and we don't have an address. This is because it takes a couple seconds for Azure to pick it up and also for the gateway to be linked to the gateway class. So if we execute the same command again, we can see it's programmed, and we also got a public IP. We got this public IP because Azure provided this. So if you're not using Azure, you might not get this public IP depending on what environment you're using. But I'm going to copy this IP address and now switch over to the Azure portal and enter it into my DNS record. Here in the Azure portal, I've opened already my DNS zone. And as you can see, I don't have any entries for traffic. That's the URL I want to use today. So I'm going to create a new record. I first paste the IP address. Then the name is going to be traffic.programmingwithwolfgang.com. That's the URL we configured in the variable we defined before. So if you follow this demo, that's what you have to change. And you can leave everything else as it is. So we create this. That's now created. And with this, we can now switch back to the terminal and set up our listener set. Back in the terminal, let's create a new namespace. That's where we are going to deploy our demo app. And if you think about multi-tenancy, you could think that this is the namespace of one of the teams, and we're just onboarding this team right now. So they get their own namespace. Then we deploy a demo app This is just a very simple pod that's running with the image traffic who am I, and we expose a service on port 80. Now the interesting part, now let's create the listener set. So here you can see it's of type listener set. We provide a unique name for this namespace. Then we provide also the namespace, the reference to the parent, which is the gateway we have deployed before, and then all the listeners we need. In this case, we just start simple with one listener on port 80, protocol HTTP, and the host name is the URL we just configured in the DNS zone. Then let's apply this. And this only takes 1 second usually to be applied. So if we do now a kubectl get listener set, then we can see it's already accepted and programmed set to true. So everything looks good. But there's one more thing we have to configure, and that's the HTTP route. Because the listener set only replaces the gateway, but we still need a link from either gateway or listener set to our application, or to be more precise, to the service. So now let's deploy this HTTP route. That's exactly the same as you would use if you were using the gateway. So we have to type HTTP route, again, a name and the namespace we deployed with a reference to the parent. And the only difference is here you reference the listener set and not the gateway. And then for the host names, we have the same URL configured we used for the DNS and the listener set. And under the rules, we define which path or which header, however we want to do the routing and where we route to. In this case, we route everything to a service of this name on port 80. So if you take a look at my playlist about the Gateway API, you will see I have a couple videos about the routing and all the options. But for now, let's keep it as simple as possible. We route everything to our service. Then let's apply this. And that's everything we have to do. So one last check. We can do a kubectl get all in our namespace. And here you can see we have our pod running and we have the service of cluster IP. This means we have no external IP, and we'll go to it, or we'll reach it through the gateway API, the listener set, and then through the HTTP route to the service. And the service sends it to the pod, and the pod will give us the response. So now we can test it. So what we're going to call is this URL. So I'm just going to copy it, and it will switch over to a browser, and they will see if it works. Here in the browser, I already entered the URL. What's important is with HTTP, and I forgot the /, so let's add them. If we call this URL now, we should see our application responding. Here you can see we got a response. It's from traffic. You can see we're using Mozilla. We can see the host. And we can also see it's not a secure connection because we were using HTTP. But the important part is we were able to access our application through the listener set. And this shows, in my opinion, how amazing the listener set is, because I, as a team who is using the cluster, don't need any admin privileges or another team. I can just create it in my own namespace, configure it, and it will work. So the last part that's missing is the HTTPS connection. This means we need a TLS certificate. And I will show you in my next video how we can set this up with the cert manager. So once the cert manager is configured, it will automatically create the TLS certificate, and it will also automatically update them. This means certificates should never expire. That's everything I want to show you today. The listener set is an amazing feature in my opinion, because I, as a team who is using the cluster, I don't need to go to another team just to get the gateway changed. And also, if I mess up the listener set, I don't mess up the gateway and therefore don't affect the other teams. So this should make operating multi-tenancy clusters easier, safer, and also faster, because I can just make changes whenever I need them and I don't have to wait for anyone else. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can configure the cert manager. I've already done this with the gateway API or the gateway before, so it's basically the same steps. But if you're new to this topic, I invite you to take a look at the video. And for today, I hope you like this. Let me know if you're using ListenerSet, if you find it as great as I do. I would also appreciate if you could like and share the video. And I hope to see you next time with another video.